5 is quickly becoming only for the rich and a luxury in life. But speaking of rich, how do you even know if you are rich anymore? Because the world of money is moving so quickly these days. How can you tell if you are rich? What does it mean to be rich? Well, a lot of people have different versions of it. You know, you can say, I don't have a lot of money, but I'm wealthy because I have my health and I have my family, so that makes me rich. That's one kind of rich. Other people measure it by their finances alone. What's my net worth compared to everybody else? But how much money do you actually need to feel rich? Is it $100,000 a year salary? Is it $250,000 a year? Or is it $1 million in the bank? Or is it something completely different, like peace of mind or freedom over your time? Those are other ways you might feel wealthy. I know that's probably the number one thing for me, the fact that I completely control my schedule these days. You know, the number one thing that makes me feel wealthy is the complete control over my time. I love being able to do things when I want to do it, wake up when I want to wake up, and work everything around my schedule and how I want to do it. Not everybody has that luxury. A lot of people have to wake up and go to work every day to a job that they hate, and I feel fortunate that I don't have to do that. But let's look at the money side of things first, because I know that's what everybody wants to hear about. And to get you into the top 10% of earners in the United States, you need to earn around $250,000 a year or more, or at least have a $2.1 million of net worth after all of your debts and adjusted for inflation. This is usually people with careers in medicine, tech, business owners, or dual income households that are both earning high salaries. And here's the key. Once you reach that level, you don't automatically live a luxurious lifestyle, but what you gain from it is options. You know, the ability to choose where you live, where your kids go to school, if you travel, or whether you can quit your job that you hate. You know, it gives you freedom in life that you don't have if you are below that. And of course, because it's the top 10%, naturally, most people will never end up in this category because it's just not realistic. But here's where the typical American does end up. Between ages 18 to 24, you might have $11,000 worth of net worth. 35 to 44, you might have $135,000. 55 to 64, maybe $410,000. And between ages 70 and 74, about $476,000. And of course, usually it starts to go down from there, because after you reach your mid-70s, you're probably going to be depleting your net worth and withdrawing most of the money you save for retirement in order to live out the rest of your life. So it's like this. If you are in your 20s or your 30s right now, you are not supposed to feel wealthy. You know, this is the struggle time. This is the time when you have to build up to actually having something in life. You know, the problem is social media, all these young kids in their mid-20s who are already multimillionaires and flashing all their cash and everything that they own online. And it makes everybody else who's in their mid-20s think that if they don't have that by now, then there's some kind of a failure. But it's just not the case, guys. Like, I look at myself as an example. You know, in my mid-20s, I would never be able to do what I'm doing right now, coming to California for long stretches of the summer, and then going back to Florida, paying for 2 places to live, things like that. It's expensive, but I built myself up to it. You know, it's like you can't have it all from the very beginning. Life just doesn't work that way. But if you have patience and if you consistently work towards your goal, if something like that is your goal, then you will have it. It's just a matter of time. It's not if, but when. But here's the most interesting thing. Even the top 10% of Americans, a lot of times, they don't actually feel rich because their money is often tied up in their home, their retirement accounts, their businesses. A lot of it is not liquid cash, and they live in expensive areas of the country like New York, San Francisco, LA, Miami, places where the cost of living is high, and that eats into the amount of money you're able to put away. So a lot of people in this category don't feel rich, but they feel like they're at least in the upper class of society, and they still budget and they watch their spending. They contribute heavily to their retirement savings, and they might go on 1 or 2 vacations a year. They will buy coffee without thinking about it and shop on Amazon, but still won't worry about the money. Because obviously, if you're making multiple 6 figures a year, if you spend an extra $500 a month on non-essentials, it really doesn't matter. But the psychology behind these people not feeling wealthy is kind of interesting, because I've talked about this a little bit in past videos, but you use the term $1 million, for example. When I was a kid growing up, $1 million was a lot of money. McDonald's used to give away $1 million for winning the Monopoly Boardwalk game. And it used to be like, you're set for life if you win this. But nowadays, $1 million is most likely not going to have you set for life unless you're already older and you live in a low cost of living area, then maybe. But the point is that the goalpost for what wealth is keeps moving. If you make 100 grand a year, now you want to make 200 grand a year. If you reach 200 grand a year, now you want to make $500,000 a year. Like, it's never enough, which is definitely a problem, and that's what we call greed. And even if you make it to a very comfortable upper middle class lifestyle, you see a 25-year-old driving a Lamborghini on TikTok because he made it big in crypto, that makes you feel like a failure because it took you until 45 to reach that. That's not reality. Sure, there are some people out there who got lucky like that and have made a fortune at a very young age, but those people are an extremely small minority. So one of the biggest things you can do is just not compare yourself to where other people have made it, especially if they're a lot older or a lot younger than you. Maybe you can compare yourself to your peers, people in a similar age group, to kind of gauge how far you have made it. But comparing yourself to somebody much younger that made it early, or somebody much older that has had decades to build up wealth, is not a fair comparison. And here's the thing, there's a huge difference between the top 10% and the top 1% in America. The top 1% usually means you have a $10 million plus net worth. You might make over $600,000 a year. And at this level, running out of money is not really a concern anymore. People in this category can make big mistakes. They can lose their job, they can take big financial risks, and they can still be fine, providing that they don't lose control. They don't check their bank accounts or their budget to see if they can go on vacation. They just do it. But there's actually a middle ground between the top 1% and the top 10%. People who have a $3 to $5 million net worth, and people who have enough investments to withdraw anywhere between $100,000 and $300,000 per year without working. Those people aren't flying on private jets, but they can retire early, they can live in a nice neighborhood, they can also travel whenever they want, and they're never going to stress about spending $150 at a restaurant for dinner. This is kind of the threshold that you need to reach in today's day and age to sort of start feeling wealthy. $3 to $5 million net worth is pretty hefty, and you're well beyond most folks at that point, and you can just kind of stop worrying about the money. So how do you reach this top tier of society if it's a goal of yours? Well, people reach it through different methods. Some people reach it through extreme frugality over many years. Some people just work constantly. They are workaholics. People work 60 or 80 hours a week to make as much money as possible and put it away and compound it. And other people just hustle for decades. People might work their entire life and never retire and never really stop working in order to achieve this status. And you have to sit there and ask yourself, when is enough for me? I've heard from many of you about financial situations and things that you go through in life. And I feel like there's a very big spectrum of people out there. Like, some people can be happy making 50 grand a year and living in an average neighborhood and having all their bills paid. Other people, they'll feel like a complete failure if they're doing that, and they need to make multiple six figures a year and live in a $1 million plus home and drive a luxury car in order to feel like they are somebody. For me, the thing that makes me feel wealthy is the fact that I can come here for 5 months out of the year and not worry about it, guys. Now, that's been many years of building up to that. And also, I don't have any kids. I have very low expenses. That enables me to have that sort of freedom. I don't have to get back to Florida so my kid can go back to school. I don't have any debt that I have to contribute to pay off each month that will hinder my ability to do this. I don't have any expensive car payments. I don't buy a bunch of things each month, just basic necessities for survival, food and utilities, and that's it. I would have to say, like, when I started doing this about 4 years ago, on a regular basis, that's what makes me feel wealthy. I was never able to stay as long as I'm able to stay now, but just the fact that I was even able to do it at all, come here for a month or two back in 2021 felt extremely luxurious, and it still does now. But the sad part is people lose sight of what it means to be rich. Like, people build up this net worth, they make it to the top 10% or even the top 5% of Americans, and they lose sight of what it actually means to be rich. By the time a lot of people get there, they don't even enjoy it. A lot of people have the numbers to be rich on paper, but they don't have the mindset to be rich. And I guess in some ways it's good, because if you get to a point where you are wealthy and all of a sudden you have a realization that you are, and you start spending too much, then that wealth can disappear pretty quickly, especially with how expensive everything is now. So in some ways it's good to still kind of act like you're poor, even if you are rich, because after all, it's those spending and saving habits that got you there to begin with. But here are some of the characteristics that people say definitely make them feel rich. And I'd have to agree with all of these. Being able to say no to a boss, a client, or a toxic job. In my case, it was not having to work as a real estate agent anymore. My last 2 or 3 years of being an agent, I kind of hated it, guys, and I really wanted to get out. And when I started my YouTube channel, my number one goal was to turn this into my full-time living, and I did just that. It took me a couple years to do it, and I was able to move on and do something in life that I really enjoy versus something that I just couldn't stand anymore. Also, knowing that your family is safe. If something unexpected happens, they'll be taken care of. Having time freedom where your day belongs to you. You decide how you want to spend most of the hours of the day. Or not caring about what your neighbor drives or where they go on vacation, because you know that you could do it too, but you're just choosing not to. The reality is, most people will never become a millionaire. Most people will never make it into the top 10% of society. That's why it's the top 10%. But that's okay, because you don't have to get to these levels in life in order to feel rich. I wanted to bring this up and talk about it because I wanted to make sure people understand that there are other things that can make you feel rich. And maybe if you reach all those milestones in life, it doesn't really matter what your net worth is. If you're able to do things that you enjoy and it's not a financial concern for you, well, in my opinion, that's wealthy, regardless of what the number on your bank account or your financial statement says. When your bills are paid and you can sleep without worrying about money, and you have control over your time, and you don't live your life trying to impress anyone anymore, that's real wealth.